Winter has a way of shrinking the world. When the snow falls heavy enough, roads disappear, cell signals fade, and sound gets swallowed by trees and distance. I have always trusted places like that. Cabins buried deep in the mountains, silence thick enough to think clearly. For a long time, I believed being alone meant being safe. But there were 2 nights, 2 different cabins, miles apart. And on both of those nights, that silence felt different. Heavier. Closer. Like it was not empty at all. And both times, I learned something I wish I had never understood. Isolation does not mean empty. What happened to me took place about 5 years ago. It was the middle of winter, a short solo trip into a mountain region in the eastern United States. I had grown up not far from that area, so being there never felt reckless. It was not an adventure. It was familiar ground, predictable, quiet. The mountains had always been the one place where I felt steady. When life became overwhelming, that was where I went to reset. I had visited that region many times before. I knew the terrain well enough to feel comfortable even in cold weather. At the time, it felt like the safest possible setting for a few peaceful days alone. Looking back now, I understand that the isolation, the snow, the elevation, and the total darkness probably made everything that followed feel much worse. I packed carefully and left before sunrise. I parked at a small gravel turnout near an old forest access road and began hiking in. The walk took about 2 hours through packed snow. Eventually, I found a spot on slightly higher ground with a clear view of the valley below. It felt right. If you have spent enough nights camping, you understand that instinct. There is a moment when you simply know this is where you stop. The first day was completely normal. That detail matters. Nothing felt wrong, no strange sensations, no warning signs. My instincts have always been reliable, especially outdoors. I pitched my tent, walked down to a small stream to filter water, and spent the afternoon exploring the surrounding area to get oriented. I did not see anyone. That was not unusual for that time of year. The only sounds were wind through the trees and the occasional crack of a branch somewhere in the distance. By nightfall, I was tired in the best way possible. I ate a simple meal, checked my gear, zipped up the tent, and fell asleep quickly. The second day was almost identical. I hiked, I listened to the forest, I watched how the light shifted across the snow. Originally, I planned to camp for the entire trip. I have enough experience to do that safely. However, the months before this trip had been difficult. I was mentally drained, and winter weather in the mountains can turn harsh without warning. A few days before leaving home, I booked a small, inexpensive cabin nearby for 2 nights. The plan was simple: rest indoors, then return to camping for one final night before driving home. I never made it to the second night in that cabin. When I arrived, everything appeared ordinary. The cabin was clean, though it clearly had not been used recently. It had 3 rooms, a bedroom, a bathroom, and a small living area with a kitchenette. The space was tight but cozy, built in a way that seemed designed to hold warmth. 2 things stood out to me. The first was a locked interior door. From the outside structure of the cabin, it was obvious there was a small additional space behind it, too narrow to be a proper room. I assumed it was storage for the owner. Since it was locked, I did not question it further. The second detail was the layout. The living room and kitchen were positioned at one end. From there, the interior narrowed into a long hallway that led to the bedroom and bathroom at the far end. From outside, that narrowing was not obvious. Inside, however, it created a strange visual effect. At the time, I thought perhaps the design helped with insulation. Still, it felt unusual. That evening followed a normal routine. I took a hot shower, I cooked a simple dinner. I lay in bed reading. Nothing about the atmosphere suggested danger. I woke up around 2:30 in the morning to what remains the most terrifying experience of my life. At first, I did not understand what was happening. I could hear a sound, faint but distinct. At the same time, I realized I could not move. My body would not respond. The sound grew louder, closer, and then I became aware that something was in the room with me. I could not see it clearly, but I felt absolutely certain it was standing against the wall across from my bed. My body was completely paralyzed. I could not even turn my head. I tried to focus my eyes downward, but all I saw was a dark shape. I tried to speak. No sound came out. I do not know how long that state lasted. It was not just a few seconds. I was fully conscious of my fear. I was shaking. Sweat covered my skin. And yet, I could not move. When control finally returned to my body, I knew immediately that whatever had been there was gone. I cannot explain how I knew. It was simply an internal certainty. I did not get out of bed. Many people probably would have. I remained there, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. When I was about 8 years old, I experienced sleep paralysis once before while staying with relatives in another mountain state. I told an older family member what I had felt. He told me it was a spirit that latches onto people and does not let go easily. For years afterward, I feared it would happen again. As I grew older, life became busy, and that childhood fear faded. But that night in the cabin, lying in the dark, I felt like I had been thrown back into that memory. I felt like the same frightened kid. I considered my options. I could stay in bed and wait for morning, or I could leave the cabin in the middle of the night and hike back toward my vehicle. Winter mountains at night are not forgiving. I was afraid to step outside. I was equally afraid to stay. The fear of going out was stronger. So I stayed. Panic can either flood you with energy or completely drain you. In my case, it drained me. Despite everything, exhaustion pulled me back into sleep. The second episode was worse. Again, I could not move. It felt as if the air had been removed from the room. My chest felt crushed by invisible pressure. I believed I was screaming, but the room remained silent. Then I heard the same sound. This time, it came from the hallway. It was getting closer. Somehow, through sheer terror, I managed to slightly turn my head toward the partially open bedroom door. That was when I saw it again. The same shadow. It appeared larger as the sound intensified. And then suddenly, there was nothing. Darkness. Complete silence. The next thing I remember is morning. Snow was falling heavily outside. The daylight was bright, almost harsh. I believe I may have blacked out from panic. I packed immediately. I did not stay for the second night. I did not continue my trip. I drove straight home. Every muscle in my body ached as if I had been clenching them for hours. 5 years have passed. It has not happened again. But I do not believe the story is over. For a long time after that, I became obsessed with researching sleep paralysis. Medical explanations, interviews, personal accounts. The obsession eventually faded. The fear did not. On very dark nights, I sometimes feel a wave of panic before falling asleep, as if my body remembers something my mind wants to forget. Some people tell me it was stress. Others believe something else was in that cabin. I know one thing for certain. It was not imagination. Imagination does not leave you shaking, drenched in sweat, and physically sore the next day. But I also do not believe it was tied to that specific cabin, because it happened once before, in another mountain region, hundreds of miles away. There is no logical connection between the two places, and yet, deep down, I know something. This is not finished. At some point, it will return, and when it does, I will not be ready. My name is Michael Bennett. I am 40 years old now, and what I am about to describe happened 2 winters ago. It was during a week I deliberately chose to spend alone in a remote cabin in the Allegheny Highlands of Western Virginia. It was late January, the kind of time of year when secondary roads narrow into icy corridors, when cell service fades into nothing, and once snow begins to fall, it feels like the outside world quietly withdraws and leaves you suspended in silence. I was not trying to prove anything. I was not searching for intensity or some dramatic story. I was burned out. Work had been overwhelming for months. My phone rang constantly. Emails stacked up faster than I could answer them. Even at home, someone needed something. I needed quiet. I needed space. A small cabin buried in winter woods felt harmless, predictable, safe. Most of my outdoor trips in the past had been with friends, but I had also taken solo trips through forests in Oregon, northern Michigan, and parts of Pennsylvania. Being alone in nature never unsettled me. If anything, it restored me. I found the listing about 4 weeks before the trip. The price caught my attention immediately. It was lower than most comparable rentals in that region. I told myself it was January. Fewer travelers, less demand. The owner responded to my messages. He was not rude, just distant, detached. When I asked how frequently the cabin was inspected during heavy snow season, he wrote that it was fully prepared for winter guests. It was technically an answer, but not really. I ignored the unease. I did not want to invent concerns. The drive took most of the day. The final stretch of road had barely been cleared. Snow pressed inward from both sides, forming narrow white walls that made turning around feel impossible. At one point, I caught myself thinking, if something happened out there, help would not arrive quickly. That thought did not frighten me. I have always trusted myself to handle solitude. I parked where the road ended in a partially cleared patch and carried my gear the remaining distance on foot. It took nearly an hour to hike through snow that reached close to my knees. When I first saw the cabin, it matched the photographs exactly. A compact wooden structure resting among tall pine trees bent under the weight of snow. No neighboring buildings, no distant lights. Only white ground stretching outward, and dark trunks rising into a gray sky. Inside, the layout was simple, tight. The ground floor held a small living area and a compact kitchenette. A narrow staircase led to the second level, where there was one bedroom and a small bathroom. The entire structure felt like a wooden box carefully placed in the forest and left there. The first day passed peacefully. I unpacked, lit a fire in the stove, brewed coffee, and sat watching snow drift past the window. The silence was so complete it almost felt physical. By nightfall, I felt relaxed in a way I had not felt in months. If anyone had asked me whether I felt secure, I would have said yes without hesitation. The second day remained calm. But there were moments that later felt important. That morning, I stepped outside to retrieve firewood. The snow around the cabin was untouched except for my own tracks. That reassured me. At the same time, it reminded me how completely alone I was. Later that afternoon, while reading in the living room, I heard a faint tapping sound. Not from the door, from within the walls. A single, light knock. Then silence. I stood still, listening. Nothing followed. Wood contracts in winter. Temperature shifts cause movement. I told myself it was normal. It probably was. That evening, something else unsettled me. There was a faint smell in the air, cigarette smoke. I do not smoke. I noticed that scent immediately. It was subtle, barely there. I questioned myself. Perhaps it was residue from a previous guest. Perhaps the stove. I rationalized it. By the third day, a quiet tension had settled in my chest. Nothing visible was wrong, but I felt slightly misaligned with the space, as if the cabin held more presence than it should. That night, for the first time, I checked every lock carefully. I even crouched to glance beneath the bed upstairs, half amused at myself. Eventually, I went to sleep. It was not deep sleep. It felt thin, breakable. At some point during the night, I opened my eyes to a sound that did not belong. It was faint at first, like fabric sliding against wood. I waited. Then it came again, clearer, and unmistakably from directly below me. My body went rigid. Every muscle tightened at once. My heart pounded so violently I felt it in my throat. That cannot be happening, I thought. Then the sound repeated, slow, controlled, like someone carefully repositioning their weight. I reached for my phone without lowering my gaze. I could not bring myself to look down. The thought of placing my feet on the floor felt unbearable. Instead, I shifted sideways across the mattress until I reached the wall. In one rapid movement, I slid off the bed, keeping my legs lifted away from the open space underneath. My hands trembled as I activated the flashlight. I crouched and directed the beam beneath the bed. For a split second, I hoped I would see nothing, empty boards, but I did not. There was a man. He was lying flat against the wood, pressed so close to the ground he almost blended into shadow. When the light reached his face, his eyes reflected back at me. He did not blink. He did not speak. He simply stared, as if he had been waiting. Everything after that moved quickly. The bedroom door had a key on the inside. I backed into the hallway, pulled the door shut, locked it from the outside. I did not wait to hear movement. I ran down the stairs, nearly slipped, and threw open the front door into the freezing night. I do not remember putting on my coat properly. I ran through the snow until I reached the trees. Because I knew there was no signal, I had brought a satellite phone. I have never been more grateful for a decision in my life. I called emergency services. They warned me it would take time, so I waited, hidden among the trees, watching the cabin, expecting the door to open. The cold was severe. Snow fell without mercy, but adrenaline drowned it out. After roughly 2.5 hours, I saw flashing lights through the snowfall. I led the officers inside. I pointed to the bedroom, to the space beneath the bed. They searched everything: closets, cabinets, storage compartments, the attic space. He was gone. The door was still locked, the windows intact, no broken panels, no hidden exits. Nothing made sense. The officers spoke carefully, professionally. I saw the doubt in their eyes. I filed a report. I submitted a complaint about the property, the unusually low rate, the distant communication. The owner refunded my money almost immediately. The case never progressed. 2 years have passed. What stays with me is not only the image of that man under the bed, it is the knowledge that he had been there for some time, which means while I was cooking, reading, sleeping, believing I was alone, I was not. Now, when I hear my house settle at night, when floorboards creak, when walls shift with temperature, I do not think about ghosts. I think about proximity. About how easily someone can exist within arm's reach, without you knowing. And how the body sometimes recognizes danger long before the mind is ready to accept it. Subscribe for more real horror stories. Like the video if you felt this fear too.